The next escalation arrived in the form of an audacious move by the HOA. They launched a floating home onto my pond, seemingly under the impression that they could assert authority over my property through physical occupation. Their plan, however, failed spectacularly because they underestimated both the intricacies of the pond and my foresight in managing it. What they believed would intimidate or pressure us instead became a lesson in strategic patience and control. The floating home was transported early one morning, silently gliding onto the waters of my pond while Karen watched proudly from the shore. She imagined that her action would provoke submission or at least force negotiation. Instead, the structure drifted awkwardly, caught by currents I had long monitored and controlled. Without any interference on our part, the home became stranded in shallow waters, its hull scraping the bottom and its occupants struggling to stabilize it. Karen's expressions shifted from triumph to confusion as it became clear that her move was not producing the desired results. By mid-morning, I had arrived at the pond's edge, calm and measured. Observing the floating home, I knew the time had come to act decisively. The pond, carefully engineered with variable depths and subtle channels, allowed me to guide the structure without direct confrontation. Using ropes and controlled water flow, the floating home was redirected toward a designated area that ensured it could not leave without assistance, and without acknowledging my authority. Karen's frantic attempts to intervene only highlighted her ignorance of the pond's layout and my complete mastery over it. Law enforcement, called yet again by Karen, arrived to a scene that initially seemed chaotic. They expected a dispute, perhaps even a confrontation between parties, but what they encountered was controlled precision. The floating home, now securely positioned, was in no danger, yet it was entirely contained within my jurisdiction. My spouse and I explained the legal and property aspects calmly. The pond, the waters, and all floating structures fell entirely under our ownership. Karen's claims, and her frantic calls for emergency intervention, were invalidated by clear documentation, property maps, and the obvious control we exercised over the pond's waters. As the day progressed, Karen attempted every tactic she could imagine. Appeals to HOA authority, demands for immediate removal, and even gestures of intimidation toward the officers present. But each effort was systematically countered. The floating home could not leave the pond without my permission. The officers were bound by law and procedure, and Karen's influence evaporated with each futile appeal. What she had assumed would intimidate us instead showcased her lack of understanding of true authority. To reinforce the lesson, I implemented subtle yet effective measures. Channels within the pond were adjusted to ensure that any future attempts to launch structures or navigate the waters without permission would be immediately contained. Surveillance and monitoring were enhanced, and access points to the pond were reinforced, ensuring that no unauthorized individual could approach without notice. It was not only a defensive strategy but a clear message. Any attempt to assert control over my property will be met with precision, preparation, and unavoidable consequences. By evening, the floating home remained in place, immobile yet unharmed. Karen, realizing that her actions had been entirely neutralized, retreated in frustration. The HOA's efforts, intended to impose control, had instead highlighted their ignorance and inability to affect the situation meaningfully. The local community, having observed the unfolding events, began to recognize a recurring pattern. Every attempt by Karen or the HOA to interfere with our property was met with calm, calculated, and unassailable authority. The pond itself, tranquil once more, became more than a body of water. It became a symbol of strategic dominance and lawful control. Karen's floating home, stranded and powerless, served as a visible reminder of the consequences of arrogance. Anyone daring to challenge authority without understanding its scope would inevitably be met with measured, precise, and unavoidable responses. As the sun set over the pond, reflecting off the water and illuminating the floating home, the lesson was unmistakable. Intrusion without respect is not only futile but strategically disadvantageous. Karen had assumed power where none existed, only to encounter the full force of planning, authority, and preparation that defined our control. And the pond, serene yet firmly under command, silently declared the truth that would resonate through every corner of the district. Authority is not claimed by force or by calls to emergency. It is exercised through foresight, strategy, and mastery of one's domain.